You're all very welcome to our Doire Press poetry reading. I'm just going to say a word or two about Doire Press before we gaze adoringly at our three poets. Doire Press is one of Ireland's most notable small presses. It was founded in the autumn of 2007 in Connemara by Lisa Frank and John Walsh. Lisa is originally from LA, and she's the co-director and layout designer for Doire Press, and is also the editor of Galway Stories, as well as co-editor of Belfast Stories and Galway Stories 2020. And John is born in Derry, and he's the co-director and commissioning editor of Doire Press. And over the years, they've published an absolute clatter of award-winning writers. And just to say, even on a personal note, they are one of the warmest, friendliest presses, and though I'm not published with Doire, I have to say I feel like one of their first cousins. They're just the loveliest press. So I'm really proud and honoured to introduce you to our three poets today. And we're going to start with Nandi. And Nandi Jola is a South African poet. She is a playwright at Smock Alley's Theatre, as part of the Rachel Baptiste 2022 programme. She was a creative writing facilitator for Ulster University's Books Beyond Boundaries in Northern Ireland and Poetry Ireland. And she is currently studying for her MA in Poetry at Queen's University Belfast. And her debut collection, Home is Neither Here Nor There, is published obviously by Doire. And the collection is the story of one woman's arrival to Belfast from South Africa and how she made a home there. It deepens to examine the lives of other black South Africans, from the mathematician Gladys May West to the Khoisan woman Sarah Bartman, who was lured to Europe in the 19th century and kept here as a freak show attraction until her death. I'd also like to introduce you to David Butler. And David Butler is an award-winning poet, short story writer, dramatist and novelist. And his third collection, Leafy Sequence, was published by Doire Press in 2021. His other poetry collections are All the Barbaric Glass, Doire, 2017, and Via Crucis, Doghouse, 2011. And David also recently won the Colin Tobin International Short Story Award. In short, we're sickened by how talented and awarded he's been. And David's poetry, it reminds us of what poetry can be, and this is a quote, wise, honed, abundant, and a pleasure to read and reread. And it's astonishing in its brilliance, unforgettable in its descriptive and lyrical command. Finely crafted is another phrase that is used over and over again to describe David's work. And then finally we have Amanda Bell's most recent, and her most recent poetry collection is Riptide, again from Doire in 2021, and a haiku chapbook revolution, Wildflower Poetry Press, was published in March 2022. She is an assistant editor at the Haibun Journal, and awards include a Merit Book Award and shortlisting for the Strong Shine Award, a Touchstone Distinguished Books Award, and Irish Poem of the Year 2018. And if you'd like to hear more about Amanda, her website is www.clearisabellwritingservices.ie, which really is such a great name for a website. And again, you'd be sickened by Amanda, her talent, and the awards. So I'm going to invite Nandi to read first her wonderful collection that ends just on an invitation to give love a chance, on a real note of hope, but the collection doesn't in any way shy away from the hardships and the brutal facts of racism, apartheid, and migration. So Nandi, in your own time, we'd love to hear some poems from your collection.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who's here this morning. I'm just going to chit a little bit. I've got a new collection which I sent to Doire Press, so I'm going to read some poems from there, if that's okay. But I'm going to start with the ones from this collection. And I just wanted to open with that one that you just said. I don't shy away from the realities of what it is like for me as a black woman to live in Ireland. And this poem, I suppose, I just wanted to say, to set the record straight, that I am not a racist. But I know you are simply asking why. So many people want to come here to take your jobs and your homes, when you have given so much to them, a penny on a Sunday in church, at the corner shop in the trucker box with a black baby, them a penny, gold for you in return. Keep digging diamonds, I keep a penny for you. Sweet sugar, a penny. Coffee too, another penny. So you are not a racist, I hear you. I'm just going to read just something small from an article that's coming up. And this was triggered by a tweet. I'm not really active on Twitter, but this one caught my eye. And it was Chandrika Narayanan Mohan. And to quote her, she says, "My name has been misspelled on so many promos in the last few months. I can't share anything because I have to email organizers to get them to change it on their sites and graphics. And then I can share it. It's exhausting. Copy-paste it. And this painful process. It is demoralizing." And the way I responded to that was to say that, so to demonstrate what Narayanan Mohan was talking about between the plural, the differential, and the double nature of identity associated with immigrants, Nick Tembo, in his book, analyzes the Ethiopian-American Dinao Mengatso, All Our Names, which was published in 2014. It's a novel which, I suppose, it reintegrates what the author's concern with the series of displacements and also and experiences of immigrants. And then, in contrast to that, we need new names by No Violent Bulawayo, who gives us a glimpse of crossing borders and arriving and being newcomers. So the narrator, both narrators actually don't delve deep into Narayanan Mohan's trying to express to what is that demoralizing feels like. And I feel that in this book, I tried to demonstrate that. So the next poem I'm going to read is Black Irish, if I can find it. Maybe I'll start with this one, Arrivals. We came here in our rags with smiles and full of hope, unpacked into our matchbox homes in places called Spring Farm, with pictures of our exotic places and things fixed on the walls. Then we ventured out into the reality. Through interfaces we crossed, called foreigners, sometimes welcomed, not mentioning our gods or religion. We danced, we sang in our gay clothes and selling our culture and waking the bones of the troubled cities. I'm still going to find Black Irish. Just came across this one, Ink. So anyone who knows immigration sometimes can be an enemy of the people. And in fact, most times, but especially people who come from what is regarded as the third world countries, where we don't have the privileges of maybe Eastern Europeans. The process is just rigorous. So this poem is called Ink. A letter came today, 10 years late, but it arrived. Majestic and reverent, it addressed me by my first name, with the titles Dear and Miss. The letter came today, 10 years late, but it arrived. I am now a citizen. I will breathe the same air without fear, walk the streets of Belfast, roam Ireland like a bird. I am no longer a case number or statistics. I'm not on the next charter plane, nor am I going from detention to deportation. I am free because the letter came. Hair. Not a day goes by without someone touching my hair. My hair is my body. And the more hands touch my hair and say things like tan, dark skin, colored, I always tell them I am black. I am black as Angela Davis, black as slavery, black like apartheid, like history, struggle. My hair is black. It is my flag, my roots, my decolonization. It's my confidence. But you would rather have me cover it up, straighten it, curl it, put a wig over it. No, it demands to be seen. It commands it. It is symbolic, iconic. It is me. It's my hair. And I found Black Irish. We met at sea in Cape Agulhas, the infinite world running in confluence. 8 ante meridium, a boy on a bus number 11 translates to his mother like a needle on a thread, weaving in and out of English and Swahili. A nun taps the woman on the shoulder. Habari, habari yako, hello, how are you? Then they speak for the rest of that journey through their habit and hijab. The boy's limb then stretches towards the bell between prams, stairs, and the moist breath of an early bus. She struts and bellows below pale faces to the halt of the bus. This is what Irish means, she thinks to herself, strangers speaking to you in Swahili, and a child that thinks that his father was from the Falls. Yeah, one more? Yeah? Thank you. So I'm going to read from the new collection. I hope it's a new collection. And this one, it opens up with a quote from Simone Leigh about sovereignty. To be sovereign is not to be subject to another's authority, another's desires, or another's gaze, but rather to be the author of your own history. The empire's children. We are fighting the war with our guilt for raising children who don't know their gods. Some of us argue that colonization was not all bad, that it left a legacy of roads, bridges, hospitals, prisons. Our dead Drax Road now covered up in tar, roundabouts replaced with matchbox homes and kraals for roundabouts. The wells have dried up completely. The men have fled to the city, abandoning their crops of maize, chickens, and their grandfathers' wishes, leaving the cattle and the land in the hands of the colonizers. Now they are here, coughed up by dinghy boats, begging for bread, filling up more prisons for free labor and the hope of a British passport. Berlin Conference, 15th of November 1884 to the 26th of February 1885. European heads of state walked into a room with maps under their armpits, strategies of divisions, well thoughts, shaking hands over the deal. Demone, or French Demone, now Benin. French Sudan, now Mali. Guinea, French Guinea. Mauritania, Nigeria, Senegal, French Upper Volta, now Burkina Faso. Africa's kingdoms went down over a covenant signed in blood, delivered by soldiers with bullets, raping and looting in a war that was never announced. Dear Belgium, all these years have passed and you still refuse to open to the world. How are we to move forward, you and I, in this entanglement of passports, citizenship, lies, and blood? Does my dark skin ring a call in your ears to look in the dark places of your closets to see if any skeletons want to dance with the truth? Where is your own pride? Is it buried in the dead? It can't be in the 180,000 positions from Africa, locked up behind the glass of display cabinets that allows you to live in denial. There's still time. Just one more. Okay. Changing hands. The tourist square on the main street is filled with pigeons dotted across the mosaic tiles brought in by the Portuguese migrants who arrived after the Germans. The square is a symposium overlooking Elizabeth's statue, a meeting of cultures from Mogadishu to Harare, scrambling for the gold dust left behind by the Anglo-Irish War. It's not hard to find a treasure here in these English street names and buildings erected in the African skies. Motherwell is here. So is Belfast in this friendly city called Port Elizabeth. Ngwaskako.
Thank you very much, Nandi, for that beautiful reading. And it's such a privilege to hear the writer themselves reading their work. It brings it alive in a way that, in a different way than the intimacy of the page. I'd like to call on David Butler now to please come and blind us with his brilliance.
I'm probably more likely to sicken you. It's absolutely lovely to be here. It's a birthday of sorts, I think. Was it the 29th of September that we launched? Yeah, so that was yesterday, a year ago. Myself and Amanda launched together. And of course, it was during lockdown, so we had to do an online launch. So it really is wonderful to have a live audience and a live reading. As Anne said, it's my third collection. If anyone's interested in the back catalogue, we can talk special prices. They're all over there afterwards. So yeah, as I said, it was launched during lockdown. So maybe I'll begin with a poem that was written during that very, very strange period, entitled Distancing. Now we are wintering, the whole hive stupefied to silence, each in their cell who isn't soldiering, an inmate of a new shallot. The city's simulacra, drone-shot piazzas, enchanted palaces, empty train-set trains, vistas dreamed by De Chirico, traffic lights sequencing the memory of traffic, confined, while ineluctably somewhere else, the toll, until we're numbed by the scale of it, each week, the heat and bustle more distant, more unlikely, nothing to feed but waxing apprehension. What will eclose this long cocooning, and on what tentative wings? I'd like to do a few dedicatory poems, I suppose, to lost members of my family that are contained in this. My mother died way back in 2001 after a long illness of cancer. And as she was getting weaker, it was about this time of year, myself and herself brought our dog down to the Phoenix Park for a walk. And we got caught in a leaf storm, just this wind, and all these leaves came down. It was very, very vivid. I still have that memory. So this is a poem entitled Leaf Storm, about that day, in memory of my mother. Some days after the diagnosis set time, a death watch beetle ticking, you set out undaunted for the park. Your time of year, air cold as water, the trees touched with fleeting majesty. As we rounded a beach copse, a puckish wind stirred up and, like Dante's fugitives, drove all about a streaming leaf storm, shoal dense and endless, brass upon brass, chattering, shearing in great murmurations, showing the raw grandeur in letting go. Thank you very much. My sister also died of cancer back in 2015, and this was her favourite of my poems that I'd ever written, so I'll dedicate this one to her. It's entitled River Gods. I'd always been horrified by the thought of river gods, their webbed skin, their breath of must and decay, their muscles quirky as eels. Fetid creatures were sure to live in the long tresses of beard that dangled from their mouths, glutted and soft with their dull monotony of swallowing. And to think of the bathing nymph, how the young flesh must recoil at the first touch before she is dragged down, that set my skin writhing. I was wrong. River gods are harmless creatures, too awkward to walk on dry land without stumbling. And then just before lockdown, my dad finally passed away. He was a very good age, he was in his 90s. But it did mean we could actually have a real funeral, which was marvellous. The entire family and my godfather, his last living brother and so forth. Had it happened 2 months later, it would have been a very, very strange experience. But this is kind of with apologies to my dad, because he was a fluent Gaeilgeoir and I'm not, but I have tried writing a few poems in Irish. So this one is entitled Lasar Chuile. A Lasar Chuile is a goldfinch. Lasar Chuile. A cheoltóir éireach, a réimar a geal, I de chotéil data mar carnaval, I de bhuinchailí buí is daig fiddlejarig cho mairach bin le madanarig, a ile fóin, có bhfuil de jawa, fan agus aber de ruin bua, féach cho even is atá in law, féach cho buin is atá an dúlra. And just in case you didn't quite catch all of it, maybe I'll offer a little translation. Goldfinch, airy musician, bright reveller, in your coat party-coloured like carnival, in your yellow sleeves and red mask, as merry sweet as a spring morning, wandering poet, what's your hurry? Stay and sing your victory chant. Look how delightful is the day. See how durable is nature. And as it happens, the goldfinch was my mother's favourite bird. She was a dedicated bird watcher. Now, the collection itself, it began as an arts commission for Dún Laoghaire Rathdown. They commissioned a sequence of poems based around Black Rock, was the commission. So I followed the dart line from the Salt March at Booterstown out to the 40-foot and wrote a sequence of 11 poems. And I then asked my brother, who he's a printmaker, artist. He lectures over in Cambridge, in Anglia Ruskin. I asked him to illustrate it, and he did these series of illustrations, which eventually won the World Illustrators Award professional section, believe it or not, and they've been bought up by Yale, by the British Library, by the Tate Gallery, by the National Gallery here, the National Library. They're everywhere, Cambridge University. So he's done really well out of it. But anyway, I'm delighted for him. No, not at all. I mean, how many poets can say their work is in the taste? You know what I mean? It's lovely. But anyway, I then bookended this with a second sequence, which at the moment, he's doing a series of illustrations for as well, based around the Liffey, following the Liffey. So I'll read a couple of poems from each end, just to give you an idea. The opening poem is the overture to the Black Rock sequence. See it as the crow flies, or the plaintive gull that inscribes morning with a call cursive and guttural on a contour from the salt marsh to the 40-foot, high over twin filaments along which green grubs caterpillar, outward in by a sea of beaten metal. See it again as memory soars over towers driven like rivets to hold down the hem of the bay, over bandstand and pagoda, terraces, cloistered squares, to where harbour mandibles enfold the skittishness of metronomes. The second sequence, Leafy Sequence, which follows the Liffey from Island Bridge to Dublin Bay and back again, it really is all about the dispossessed, the disenfranchised, people like that, the homeless. So I'll give you the opening and the closing poem of that. It begins with Wake. Wake to the clang and clamour, the cowbell and slow glissando of a tram as its heft glides over Houston Bridge, townward. Wake again to the roasting tang, the old olfactory memory, the nut waft of bitter hops over the vats of James's Gate. Wake to a new day ascending the granite quays that channel low, spangling sunlight up the tidal drift of the Liffey. And then during the sequence, we kind of follow the day as we move down towards the bay and then back again. And it finishes then with return. Return to the cardboard lair, to its subterranean dank, to the soiled, rough sleeping bags packed liminally. Return to the rumour of wings under train-rattled vaults. Along the paving, pigeon spatter pollocked autumnally. Return again to no man's land, to a country of sleeplessness. Return to the grayscale anxieties that prowl nocturnally. Here's one of the poems from that sequence, just looking at the Halfpenny Bridge. And those of you who know me know that I can't ever resist a pun. But I do think that the final word of this poem is a killer pun. So it's entitled Cat's Eye. City lights quiver like aspen leaves in the slow licorice river. The wind has shivered a glass half moon into shimmering slivers, into silver elver scribbling under where cat-like the Halfpenny Bridge has overarched its old arch rival. The pun, I hope. The pun. This is a series of 4 poems put together, examining the phenomenon I think we all need to be examining, the climate crisis, I suppose. And it was published by Rebel Inc. online, which was great. But anyway, I'll just give it to you. It kind of examines the 4 elements in terms of things going crazy on the planet. Weather gods. 1. Tired of burnings, bulldozers, charred lungs, Chak, the rain god, decamps from Mayan rainforests. Rise the bloated trade winds, comes to reign over the old world. Days on end the swollen earth has swallowed, till it's soft as blotting paper. The sun is an aspirin dissolving in a gauze of soaked cotton. Storm drains clog, rivers turn reptilian, shed their alluvial taint in basements, swell to bursting, silver plate the floodplains. Chac moves over the face of the waters, looks on desolation wrought by man, calls up the brother elements. 2. The drunken wind which last night stomped through the playground drove the park into a frenzy of soughing boughs, buffeted the houses, sputtered down the throats of chimneys, chased cascades of startled leaves against the windows, has, this morning, taken a breather. The ground is littered with all the detritus of late autumn, as if a carnival has decamped, and the trees, stripped bare, as parents, when grief tears through them, are suddenly old. 3. There's a moment between drought and downpour when the winds hold their breath, the boughs stop moving, the cloud backlit is photograph still, the sea's meniscus reverent, a moment in suspense, an instant when future imperfect appears to hang in the balance, when the dice have yet to fall, the first fat drops to explode in the dust-tormented earth. 4. Weeks on, the scorched stench persists. Beyond the cowering heather, the rusted fern and bracken's burnt sienna, a blackened heath. Something else subsists beneath the ocean sibilance and gull's psychotic squabbles, the absolute silence of death. Bitterness of ash, the whitened cans, the charred bones of gorse, imploring like something from Purgatorio, a vision of Aleppo, or a lesson from our own past, the whole head pitch-capped. And I'll finish off. I hope you're not all clapping because I said I'll finish. But anyway, I'll finish off with my wife Tanya says that I never write a love poem, but I did manage to include our dog in this one. So I'll dedicate this to our dog, Mr. Shelby. It was written shortly after we got him. And I think you'll get the idea of how spoiled he is. It's entitled Light Rail. Pre-dawn. Bray stations screech and shunt. Morning is a wet nose and snuffle, 4 paws flopping to the floor for the first excursion. Outside, the street is a neon stage set, the first slow train unspooling its show reel across a bridge in a series of stills. The sitters sleep-stunned and solitary as anything from Hopper, to a soundtrack of rattling iams, the track, the train, the track, the train, the pulse of a city waking. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, David. That was absolutely beautiful. As difficult as it is for us to say, a beautiful, beautiful reading. And we now have our final reader, Amanda Bell, who's going to woo us with her words.
Thanks very much, Anne. Lovely introduction, and thanks to Nandi and David for those readings, which were just gorgeous, really powerful work. And thank you for coming this morning in this absolutely horrendous weather. It's really nice to see real people. And as David said, we launched online a year and a day ago, and it feels like such a different world, and actually seeing real people and having that sort of intangible connection is just wonderful. I didn't think I'll ever take it for granted again. And also like to thank all the organisers. I've never been to Bray before, because I'm usually away in September, and I'm really thrilled to be here for the last hurrah. I'm going to start with the title poem, Riptide. I lost it to strong currents. It slid over my cold knuckle and got swept away before it sank, though I stood chest high among tall waves while you dived and dived to save it. Every glint the sun hit seemed to strike its shape as ebb jets carved the sand from underfoot till we had to cede it to the tide and leave, quite naked for its lack. No new gold ring could bond that me, that you, those strangers lost to time. I wanted to avoid anything to do with the pandemic or lockdowns in this reading because I was developing PTSD when I was looking over them. But this one is vaguely lockdown related. I'm part of a growing group in the neighbourhood where we exchange plants and produce and knowledge. And it's a really magical thing to be involved in. And during lockdown, everything was so remote that we would leave things in sort of secret locations for one another. And this is a group of 122 different households. So it was a bit like Easter and Christmas. So it was really lovely. So this is called Winter Offerings for the HX growers. With trick-or-treating cancelled, Christmas lies in the balance. Now's the time to leave small gifts at neighbours' doors. Brittle sprigs of lavender and sage, a bag of rain-glossed bramleys, bulbs for spring, a twist of seed heads, fresh-baked bread. I may never learn who left a trug of medlars nested by my gate, those ugly cousins of the rose, crinkle-skinned and bletted, but when the rot sets in, as sweet as fudge. A number of poems in the collection were written in response to the work of Edvard Munch, and I visited, was invited to Oslo in, I think it was 2019, to visit sites associated with Munch, and one of them was the Freya chocolate factory, and he was commissioned to paint a series of panels for the canteen. In the chocolate factory, metal moulds hold sweetness as it cools. From the dark outdoors, the glow of lying snow lights up large panels in the old canteen, where a frieze of summer scenes looks down on workers in their clean white coats, deep greens of coastal trees, a group of little girls, lovers waltzing on the shore, the setting sun a pillar as it melts into the sea. The decoy in the window is light as balsam. It's been decades since it floated in a sheltered French étang. Sunlight has bleached its pigments to a subtle, dusty palette, transformed its saffron beak to beige or bone. If I leave it out to weather, will some wild osmotic process see it leach dark bottle green out of the weeds, bright yellow from the celandines, deep blue from twilit sky? Will water seep into the fissures in its dehydrated grain until it lifts up from the ground on feet of turmeric, to waddle, walk, then break into a run, take to the sky? The next two are artist poems as well. I think the first one is called Indian Yellow, and in the first line I use the word pain, but I mean P-A-N-E, not P-A-I-N. Indian Yellow. Beyond the pain, a streak of bird or falling leaf. The world has shrunk to a snow globe shot with colour. Discards of sugar-brightened trees after their summer parching. The flash of goldcrest pole or goldfinch wing, a subtle stroke, not saturation, just the hint of mango taint that lit Van Gogh's dark night, made dying Turner say, the sun is God. And the cover image is a painting by Donald Teskey, who has done a really extensive painting of North Mayo around the village of Ballycastle and the Ballinglen Arts Foundation. And it's an area I've been familiar with for my whole life, to the extent that I used to dream about it a lot as a small child. This is an incredibly fierce landscape. I don't know, in the news last week there was a diver, I think a diver or some water sports person got stuck in a cave overnight, and that was along that coast near Downpatrick Head. And when I first saw Donald Teskey's paintings, they just reminded me really vividly, not only of the landscape, but of my actual dreams about the landscape. There's an exhibition of his work in the RHA at the moment called Decade, which is absolutely phenomenal and highly recommended. Donald Teskey, Ballinglen. These are the seascapes of my dream. Sheer waves, surf a blinding white. All fractals tilting towards the centre where a rock pool holds my eye. I scale down sheets of terraced rock, then all else fades to nothing but the tinnitus of surf, the tiny searchlight of a yellow periwinkle. And my daughter went off to Lisbon yesterday, staying in a hostel called the We Hate Effing Tourists Hostel, so I thought I'd read this one. Lisbon. The limestone sets are polished smooth by feet, including ours, and those of Cumshot, Pussy Slayer, and the groom, Ratshagger, as his t-shirt claims. We see them waiting for a train. Their matching clothing makes me think of armed police. At second glance, they seem like children queuing for a treat. They disembark close to the beach, take care to fold their special clothes before they hit the drink. It's barely noon, the sun still high, their bodies soft and pink. Eastwards, the Tagus snakes between two shores. The ferry to Cachilas chugs through mullet shoals. The sea is greenly tempting, but we only dip our toes. And I usually go away in September, as I was saying. I have been in Cadiz for a few years in a row now at this time of year, and I've been there for the vigil of Our Lady of Ransom, which is the most extraordinary procession. So this is the vigil of Our Lady of Ransom. Defleshed clamshells flank the aisle, embedded in the pillars. Cloves scent the air. A tiny baby at the altar clasps her own pierced earlobes, writhing in her father's arms. Behind tiers of dripping candles stands Our Lady of Ransom, holding manacles. This evening in the bar, her bearers meet, embrace, before they hoist her silver bier head high, parade her through the parish with a guard of hair-oiled dignitaries. Before the residencia, inmates line up in chairs to watch the train of brass and incense pass. I tuck a little card into my billfold and peruse it over tapas. Redemptionis captivorum. On the countertop, a ham stand with a black pig's leg, the small, neat foot on point, tilts heavenwards. I let its rich smoked fat melt on my tongue, and afterwards recall display, not sacrifice. And this is a transcreation or version of a poem by Padma Sachdev. It's an Indian novelist and poet who died last year. It's called Daring. No one drinks from the well to the right of our hill, though it brims with bright water. No one glances that way, since a calf drowned in its depths, deceived by drifting blossoms. Deep in its core, shadows yearn for their return, the girls with vessels. The water calls to me in daylight, implores me to imbibe it in full sight. At night, I bathe unseen in its darkness, cup its coolness in my palms and raise it to my mouth. My thirst is as insatiable as love. So 2 more. I'm going to read a haibun. There are 10 haibun threaded through the collection. That's the prose haiku hybrid I use quite a lot. This is called Grandfather's Medals, in memory of George Bell, 1898 to 1975. He rarely speaks of his 2 years in the trenches. At 20, he has already put it behind him. He comes home to work the land. He marries, rears a family. Later, his children hear snippets. How shrapnel destroyed a Christmas pudding. How a comrade lanced a bayonet at him for cutting his hair badly. He had got his own bayonet and rifle when he turned 18. An unopened box, 3 medals and a dog tag, tarnish in the dark. He's a farm manager with a good eye for stock, judges sheep and cattle at shows. When he cups his hands to his mouth and lows, they amble over. Sometimes he walks the fields with his son. When they come upon a flock of sheep torn apart by dogs, it all comes flooding back. The 3rd of September, 1939, my grandfather stays up all night, weeping. And the last poem is currently my favourite poem from the collection, I think, which I wrote for my eldest daughter, Elizabeth. It's called Obad. As we drive along the quays at dawn, a clean sun lightly strokes the domes, transforms the city to a hallmark card, all baby pinks and blues, white clouds scudding out to sea as eastbound geese inscribe the sky with their goodbyes. This is the hour the homeless own the empty streets. At traffic lights, a bearded icon supplicates, but I drive on, my wallet left at home. I must remember to avoid the tolls on my way back without you. Throat catching on diesel fumes, I watch you disappear into the ship beneath your rucksack carapace. How I envy you this barely broken day. Dublin Bay reflecting nacre. Everything you need in just one bag. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that another beautiful reading. So look, we have a few minutes at the end, so I might throw a question at each of the poets and see if they can catch it. I'll just... So I'm going to start with Nandi. And in the collection, there are 3 poems highlighting the brutal plight of Sarah Bartman. And what is it about her story in particular that moved you to honour her life in your writing?
Wow. I think it's the fact that it hasn't ended. The trafficking of women, black women, and their treatment, really, their body image and what that means to the Western eyes, the gaze on them, and the way that they are described. So, for example, one of the poems made it to the Poetry Ireland anthology about the body and illness, and so it's a continuation then from harvesting of organs and things like that to what it means for FGM victims and survivors in Europe, which is a practice that still happens. So I suppose for me it's to think to myself, how is this still happening in modern day? And how do I relate that? And the latest example would be what's happening in Iran and India with the hijabs.
Thank you so much for that, Nandi. And David, I was reading a review of yours recently, and they talked about your work being, I suppose, almost like a symphony. And you've spoken before about how important sound is in your work. So could you just speak a little to, that really central role of sound in your writing?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in particular, it's what I am interested in when I write poetry, as opposed to other genre. I think it might sound a bit weird, but for me, a poem should be interesting, even if you don't speak the language, purely because of its rhythm, its sounds, what it does. It activates an element of the language that is not simply to do with denotation, but also with connotation, with sound, with rhythm. It's a whole area. It's one reason why, as Robert Frost famously said when he was asked what poetry is, he said, poetry is that quality of a language that's lost in translation. You know, you translate the meaning, but it's very hard to translate all the rest. So in a poem like, if you remember that Cat's Eye poem, for example, that is basically, it's almost like a musical riff on a certain sound. And the sound it began with was quiver, and then river and shiver, and then it sort of changes. You don't always have the same, you get sort of slight distortions. It's almost like painting with sound, if you want to put it that way. And it can be a lot of fun as well. And then some of the poets that I really admire are great at doing this. I mean, it's very obvious in someone like Seamus Heaney. But in someone like Sylvia Plath, it's very, very subtle. She does it with assonance and things like that, just vowel sounds that just become the pattern of the poem. But I find that a very fascinating area of poetry. Okay.
Thanks a million for illuminating, although I shouldn't say illuminating because that's more of a visual appreciation. And lastly, Amanda, your work has been described as, having an acutely observant eye, you yourself, and an ability to convey the essence of your experience. And there is something about, I suppose, the finesse with which your poetry is written. So you're very well known as a writer of haiku and the haibon. So do those forms, I suppose, inform the rest of your writing as well as the writing in that form itself?
Thanks, Anne. Yes, and increasingly, the more I write, the more I think everything I write is informed by haiku, particularly, which I started writing haiku just because I had a real inability to focus, and I was sitting down to write a diary, and I felt like Tristram Shandy. It was like, and then I was conceived, and then so I just couldn't contain things. So I just started using just moments in time, the haiku. And then I was using that more as a way of life, which I refer to the haiku way. But then it was something I started, refining and publishing. But it definitely informs everything else I write. I think the idea of approaching big subjects from small details rather than taking on big pictures, which I think can be, you're sort of setting yourself up for a fall almost, but if you're sort of starting with a really small point, you can grow into it. And was what I found. We were talking earlier, I had a commission responding to an exhibition about the Holocaust, which was just opened, and I was reading it on Wednesday, and it was an enormously challenging thing to do. But again, I was trying to find like a really small point, because I was using the sense of touch and textiles. So I think having those small, intensely focused entry points, they sort of free you up intellectually and imaginatively as well, that you can sort of access things that you wouldn't have immediately thought of if you're starting with really small, intense points. And then haibun, I think, I love the relationship with the prose and the haiku and that very sort of poetic, distilled prose, but more and more that's, for me, is turning into something more like fragments. I'm sort of exploring, there's such a fashion at the moment for small, short narratives, like Donal Ryan and his 500-word chapters and that sort of thing. So that idea of small, intense sections, I think, is very interesting, and that's where my haibun practice is going at the moment, I think.
Thanks a million. That's absolutely fascinating. Thanks a million. So, folks, all that's left is first to say, first of all, thanks to our wonderful readers, Nandi, Jola, David Butler, and Amanda Bell. And to thank all of you who came out on a very, very wet and windy day in Bray of a Friday at the end of September. So thanks a million for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.